We want to thank everybody so much for coming in to Delirium, Depression, and Dementia. What's the difference? Thank you, everybody. We have our presenter, Becky Franklin.
Thank you, Carmelita. I appreciate it. Well, it is so nice to have all of you here with us this evening. This is great. I wasn't sure how many to expect, and I just kept seeing those numbers go up as you were coming in. So thank you for your time tonight, and especially as it's shaped up to be a beautiful evening. I appreciate you logging on. So as Carmelita said, my name is Becky Franklin. I am a licensed professional counselor, and I also work for Tri-County Mental Health. In addition to that, I also have a private practice of my own where I do therapy services. And so stay busy wearing a couple of different hats. But with the older adult program with Tri-County, I really enjoy the opportunity to speak out in the community. Tri-County covers Clay, Platte, and Ray counties for our service radius. And within those counties, we are just really passionate about spreading the word that depression does not have to automatically be part of getting older. And we are all in the aging process day by day. We're just all doing that little by little. We're at different stages of the journey. And I think that as we are getting older, a lot of times we come to these crossroads where it just naturally makes us pause and question. And we're like, okay, is this normal? Is this something to be expected? Am I supposed to be going through this? Are other people going through this? And so that's one of the things that we also enjoy speaking to with part of this program is just sharing information that we hope will help to shed light on some of the different things that may come up as we're going through the aging process. And so that being said, this topic that we're going to cover tonight is one that I think is really good along those lines that it can help us to think about some things that have some symptoms in common, but then also some discrete or separate symptoms, and also give us some clues on how to tell them apart. But before I dive into that presentation, does anyone have any questions about Tri-County and about the services that we offer with Tri-County Mental Health?
You guys can unmute yourselves if you guys have any questions right now.
And feel free to, that being said, if as I'm presenting, if you think of any questions about Tri-County, you can put those in the chat box too, and I'll be sure to get to those at the end. So I am going to go ahead and share my screen here. See. Carmelita, does that look okay?
Yes, it looks good.
Okay, great. Thank you. Boy, it's amazing to think that prior to COVID, I don't know about the rest of you, but it's like, my goodness, there was such a learning curve. And to think that I wasn't doing any of this before COVID, I bet many of you can relate. And now the whole virtual world has become just something that now it's just commonplace. We do it all the time. It's great. All right. Well, this evening we are going to be talking about the 3 Ds. So the Ds being delirium, depression, and dementia. And just in case, I want to let you know at the outset, I will be covering a lot of content in a short period of time. Feel free, if you want to take notes or jot things down, of course, feel free to do so. I have also sent a copy of this presentation over to Carmelita, and she can email that out to you afterwards if you would like. And so sometimes knowing that at the beginning might allow you to just relax and listen and kind of soak it in if you know you're getting a copy of the presentation. But sometimes it's nice just to have those notes jotted down too. So whichever you prefer is great. So we are going to start by talking about just some general facts. And I think that this is nice to know as a general overview. So if we were to look at the life expectancy and just in general, looking at different ages and how long we are each living and just seeing some general trends, our life expectancy as a whole, as we've seen medical advances and improvements, we are living a lot longer on average now than previous generations. Add to that older adults are now the fastest growing segment of the population. So whereas before, when the baby boomers were first born, that was the largest percentage of our population. And now we're seeing that, we're kind of tracing that up through the ages. And so now if we look at the US population, we're seeing that the largest percentage is those that are 65 and older. In fact, now we see that by 2050, those that are 65 plus will outnumber those who are younger than 5 years old. So looking at this chart, that's just a nice visual. It gives us a good overview of those numbers and shows how we're on the rise. And we're kind of on the front end of that rise. So we're just going to see that more and more. So one set of symptoms that is in common for all of the 3D topics that we're going to be discussing tonight is this area of memory decline. And when I'm going out and about and leading different presentations or support groups in the community, this is a topic that comes up a lot. That I'll have people ask, memory decline, is it normal? Or maybe that comes up in different ways, like, how do I know the difference between normal memory decline or signs of dementia? And I think that's a common and legitimate concern. So we're going to be talking that through a little bit tonight. But first off, I want to just go over a commonly held myth or misconception, which is aging results in an inevitable loss of cognitive abilities, and nothing can be done to halt this decline. And that's not true. You know, we may see some shifts and changes in our cognitive ability as we are getting older, but it's also important that we recognize that our brains have neuroplasticity, meaning we can continue to learn, we can continue to do activities to remain cognitively sharp or to take in new information, and that can help to offset some of that decline or even to prevent it altogether. So certain areas of thinking do show a normal decline as we age and others remain stable. And we're going to be talking about that a little bit more on the next slide here. Interventions also can help to slow some of the changes that do occur. So sometimes when we start to notice signs of decline, it can understandably spike a little bit of worry or a little bit of anxiety that we start to notice some of those changes. And that can be troubling, especially if we're not anticipating it or we don't know why. So here's a breakdown. I really like just how we expand upon some of this terminology, and then we also put it with an image there. So I'll be going over this and explaining it, but if you do have any questions, feel free, because I know on this slide in particular, it's a lot of information. So on this chart here, and I'm just going to use my pointer to kind of show you, but this green line that is the solid green line, that is more crystallized intelligence. And so with our crystallized intelligence, it remains relatively stable. So thinking of things that are influenced by culture or education. So things that we have learned along the way. And so if you look at that green line and you look at how that corresponds to age here at the bottom, that tends to increase in performance at a very young age and then plateaus relatively and stays the same over age. Contrast that with this jagged line, which is more fluid intelligence, and that is what tends to decline with age. And so looking at that as intelligence that's influenced by biology, disease, injury, or genetics. So if there's a genetic predisposition, maybe there's a family history of other individuals who have had memory loss or even dementia. And so that can be a risk factor. It doesn't mean automatically that you will struggle with dementia, but it can put you at a greater odds of developing that diagnosis. So just to break it down a little bit further, so when we look at the area of attention, and all of these are relating to the topic of memory loss. So if you look at attention, we can either have simple or focused attention. So difficulties may be encountered when we have to multitask or divide our attention. And I don't know about you, but I feel like for myself, that's more often than not, that we live in a world where there are constantly things that are vying for our attention. So even simple things like trying to pay attention to the TV and at the same time talk on the telephone. So kind of the adage of cooking dinner while feeding the dog and wiping off the counter and answering the phone, our mind is pulled in many different directions. And so as we are getting older and naturally just more susceptible to memory decline, it can be advantageous to try to not divide our attention as many different directions. So if we can try to focus on simplifying or streamlining our focus and our attention, that may be helpful. The next topic there is speed of processing. So with this, it's the speed that cognitive and motor processes are performed. So activities may take longer. So thinking of just simple tasks like cutting something out or organizing something, putting it in order by certain criteria or details. It's not that we can't do those things, but maybe we can't do them as quickly as we used to. So that doesn't necessarily mean that there's a cognitive deficit, but it's more to do with the speed of processing. Also looking at the topic at the top right here is just in general looking at memory. So with memory, we maybe are looking at remote memory or recall of past events. So many of you may be familiar with this, but recent memory or formation of new memories takes longer. So thinking of when we hear something for the first time or when we learn something for the first time, we may have to hear it and see it or even say it multiple times to commit that to memory. Versus if it's something that's familiar and kind of old hat, then maybe we don't have to work quite as hard at remembering that. Or being able to recall. So like pulling it up to our memory when we need it. Also with language, so verbal abilities, including our vocabulary. So in the aging process, it oftentimes takes longer or it can be more difficult to find the words when we're in a conversation or trying to recall names of people or objects. So If anyone else can relate, I know I've certainly done this on multiple occasions. It's like that on the tip of your tongue kind of phenomenon that you're deep in conversation and talking about different things, and then all of a sudden you're struggling to remember, oh, where was that? What was that restaurant called? Or, yeah, who was that person? You know, the one with blonde hair. And you can recall different details about it, but then having a hard time putting certain words or names with it is common. Let's see here. And then last but not least, so reasoning and problem solving. So traditional ways of approaching solutions may change over time. So problems not encountered during life may take extra time to figure out, and it may be more difficult to problem solve. So kind of being flexible in how we respond to a need that arises or a situation that arises may be a little bit more difficult. So we kind of chuckle about this in the way that we say we become more creatures of habit. And so maybe in our younger years, we may tend to be a little more flexible and adaptive with how we respond to different things that crop up, even unexpected. And then as we're getting a little bit older, it may be a little more challenging. Not that we can't do it, but it just may take a little more effort to be able to problem solve, especially whenever it's unexpected. So since I covered a lot on this one slide, I want to pause before I go on and just make sure. Are there any questions or any comments that you'd like to add from anything that I just covered? I don't know about you, but to me, a lot of this information feels very validating, that it's just kind of nice to have that laid out and explained in a very factual sense. I think sometimes even unintentionally, a cultural context can approach some of these things almost in like kind of a stereotypical way, or like through more of a negative lens, when in fact it's just more of a factual change, that it's something that happens to many of us as we're getting older. And so just being able to go down through those and to see that that's very relatable to many of us over the years, I think it's nice. I think it's just validating. Okay. So what are some other factors with memory decline? The first one here on the left is changes in mood. So things like depression or anxiety can actually impact our motivation, following through on applying different strategies that might actually help us with memory or problem solving skills, because oftentimes with depression and anxiety, concentration becomes more difficult. Also, medications may produce side effects such as drowsiness or mental dullness, or kind of like brain fog, that feeling. Next, we might experience health changes. And so if you think of, if you have chronic pain or if you have arthritis, that can affect cognitive areas too, such as concentration or how quickly we process information. And then last but not least, sensory changes. So if you think of changes in your hearing or changes in your eyesight, that certainly can impede or interfere with processing information. So the example we put here is like hearing loss affects if the person's name was heard when they were introduced. So like if you're shaking someone's hand and they say, "Hi, I'm Becky," memory, but you can see them, but you can't hear them, then you may not walk away hearing their name. And so you have a less likely odd of remembering that at a later time. So, what can we do about it to improve our odds of having healthy memory? So, the first one here is reducing stress. So, high stress levels impair learning and memory strategies. So we want to instead try to reduce stress. And two things that we can do to have a positive impact on reducing stress is practicing relaxation techniques. So, things like deep breathing, guided visualization, mindfulness, and then also exercise. And so we may think of the physical benefits of exercise, but there's also emotional benefits to exercise too. So I love this little comic here. It says, I swam 32,847 laps today and I'm still stressed out. So he's really trying to get all his exercise in, but still feeling stressed. Another thing that's important is maintaining good health. So just staying on top of our annual checkups, doing good preventative health, and then also diet and exercise. So diet rich in fruits and veggies, and then also healthy fats. All of that can be really, really good, not only just for general physical health, but also specifically for our brain health too. Next is keeping mentally stimulated. So here we have a picture of Sudoku, but it could be anything. So it's pretty amazing how just common games or interactive activities can play a big role in staying cognitively sharp. So doing jigsaw puzzles, playing checkers or chess, even following a recipe where you have to concentrate and measure, reading books, following music. If you play an instrument, that requires reading it and interpreting it. And so all of those things can help protect against cognitive decline. And then using active strategies to help you. And I think this is something really good to recognize. Some of us may do this and not even think about it, but I love it. I think it's good food for thought on ways that we can maybe improve upon this. So there's no shame in doing things that help us to follow different ways of doing it each time. So one thing might be simply following a routine. So like when you come into the house, always putting your keys in the same place. That can be a biggie, just that you know where certain things are. So putting it there every single time creates more predictability. And so it makes it easier to go back and find them in the same place each time when you need it. Also using external techniques. So using a calendar, using a pill box. That is okay to make it tangible. It's like taking something out of your brain and putting it into a tangible format so that you can use those reminders. I like to think of it as we hold enough in our brain on a daily basis that if there's little tools like that we can use to take some of it out and have those little helpful tidbits, there's no harm in that. And then lastly, and this kind of gets back to avoiding the multitasking, but taking more time to actively process new information. So when you're introduced to someone, trying to slow down and to really focus, not being distracted with other things that you're thinking about or doing at the same time. And then maybe also trying to come up with some kind of mnemonic device or other association to help you recall that person's name. So maybe it has to do with the location where you met that person that can help you to remember it, or something else that sounds like their name or has the first letter. But anything in that moment that stands out to you that's going to help you to recall. And the key there is just really slowing down. The example that I think of with that too doesn't have to do only with recalling names, but even location. I know one thing that I catch myself doing often is if I am on the phone when I'm pulling into a parking lot, I am less likely to remember where I parked my car than if I am not on the phone. If I'm not on the phone and I'm paying attention, even if I'm not actively aware of paying attention differently, I tend to remember where I parked more likely than if I was on the phone. Those are the times that I find myself coming out to the parking lot and wandering up and down the rows to try to find my car. So just kind of a fun example to think of that's probably relatable, that, just giving our undivided attention, slowing down, paying attention to our surroundings, all of those things can make a really big difference. So this is a fun slide. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail for this, just because I think that it's something that you're probably familiar with on some level. And also, I will be sending out this presentation, or Carmelita will be making it available to you afterwards. But basically, it's a good physical activity guide as we are getting older. So we want to be mindful of not only how long we are exercising, but also how hard. So the level of activity, or how much we are challenging ourselves to work out. And so we want to do that, but we also want to be mindful of not injuring ourselves and staying within our skill level, or if we're coming back from an injury or some kind of a chronic condition, we want to balance all of those variables. So I'm going to actually just note this chat message, just because it does tie in with this section of the presentation. So Kelly, thank you for putting that comment in there, or that question. So Kelly asked, are coloring books good to keep mentally stimulated? And the answer is yes. So what a great example of something that can kind of stimulate our creative juices, and it's good for relaxation, so it helps with that stress management piece. And then also, yes, it does take some concentration and some skill in staying within the lines, or choosing different color combinations, paying attention to different patterns maybe that we want to make with different colors. So yes, that's an excellent example. It's really good. And we're seeing more and more variations of that coming out too, which is fun. Okay, so we are going to spend the rest of our time this evening breaking down the differences between delirium, dementia. So that should say delirium, dementia, and depression for the third one. So the 3 Ds are delirium, dementia, and depression. So we're going to start with delirium. And the big thing with this that kind of sets it apart to be able to recognize it is, with delirium, there is a sudden onset. So this is more of an acute episode. So kind of a standalone incident. With delirium, you're typically not going to see something ongoing for long chronic periods of time. With delirium, it's going to be more of a discrete episode with more of a sudden onset, and then it will last for a period of either hours to days, and then there will be more of a discrete ending point where there will be improvement in that behavior. And you'll see that compared to the other two categories, how that's different. With delirium, there's typically fluctuating levels of consciousness. So an individual may be doing poorly, they may rally and do better for a little bit, and then they may do poorly again. So that's not uncommon to see kind of that going back and forth. The person can become very agitated or aggressive, more confused, less alert, and it is always caused by something physical. So we're going to look at a list of different things here in a moment that can cause delirium, but some basic examples here are infection, dehydration, toxicity, something in your system, not enough oxygen to the brain, or even constipation. Severe constipation can contribute to delirium. With that, there may be some psychotic type symptoms where the individual can see and hear things that aren't real. And it's important to note that this is a medical emergency. So it's important if you see someone exhibiting these symptoms, or if you think it's even a possibility of these symptoms, to call 911, because it is something that can increase very quickly. So here are some potential causes to consider. And I'm just going to put all of these up on the screen to let you look through these, because I think it is very interesting just to think about some of the different physical things that can prompt this reaction. And so when we think of, how can something like this come on so quickly, we want to think about our body in its natural state is trying to aim for balance. It's trying to aim for homeostasis. So it's a delicate balance between all our different levels in our system. And so whenever things get too far out of balance physically, delirium can be one of the signs of that happening. And so the first one here of a UTI, a urinary tract infection, is a very, very common cause of delirium. And so a lot of times, especially if it is in an aging individual and there are sudden onset signs of delirium, that is one of the first things that they will test for alongside any possible infection or sepsis. And so it's very interesting, because I think looking at those, like, that kind of shows like those things aren't that uncommon. Getting a UTI is something that is pretty common at one point or another. But if it's not diagnosed and if it's not treated, then it can, over time, cause an upset to that balance. And so that's really the big factor there, is when there's an upset in the balance and it's not diagnosed or treated, then left to take its natural course, that can contribute to delirium. So these are examples of things that the medical staff would be aware of or take into account with an individual showing signs of delirium. Okay, so next we're going to look at the second category, which is symptoms of depression. And so with symptoms of depression, one of the things that I always like to highlight is that depression is different than sadness. It is normal and it is common for us to have a range of emotion, and one of those emotions is going to be sadness. So we are not going to always, always, always be happy or always be in a good mood. And so if we sometimes feel sadness, that does not automatically mean that we are experiencing clinical depression. However, if we are experiencing sadness or feeling overwhelmed or feeling irritable and feeling like it's really, really hard to tolerate the things that are going on around us, that may be some telltale signs that let us know, hey, I might be experiencing depression. With unhappiness related to depression, that is something that would need to be in place over a prolonged period of time, or another way of thinking of that is pervasive sadness. So even doing the things that you typically would enjoy or being around things that would typically bring happiness or kind of perk up your spirits, even then with depression, it might be really, really hard to feel an improvement in your mood. Depression can also impact both sleep patterns and appetite. And so that can go either way. You can either sleep less and have a hard time with insomnia, or you can want to sleep all the time and just feel like you're always tired and you can't get enough sleep. Or with appetite, it could be one way or the other. You can either feel like food is just not appealing and not have much of an appetite at all, or you can find yourself turning to food for comfort and feeling like you can't get enough, just wanting to be kind of mindlessly eating. Also, having a hard time with agitation or feeling restless, like it's hard to relax or hard to sit still. Sometimes individuals will describe it down at the bottom there, those slowed thinking or speaking or body movements. They think of that as like, I'm doing all my daily tasks, but it feels like I'm moving through quicksand. Everything just takes that much more effort. Also, feeling fatigue, feeling a loss of energy can go along with that. Having a hard time concentrating or remembering things, that may play out like brain fog, that you feel like you're noticing things around you, but you feel kind of removed from your settings. Depression can also contribute to thoughts of death, dying, or suicide. And I think that's something important to mention, because a lot of times, especially with the topic of suicide, that can feel kind of taboo or kind of off limits. But it's important that we recognize then when you're having symptoms of depression and you're feeling overwhelmed or you're feeling like things aren't going to get better, sometimes you're wanting an escape from feeling those negative symptoms. A lot of times when individuals are experiencing symptoms of suicide, they're not actually wanting to die. They're just wanting the pain to stop. They're wanting the discomfort to improve. And so that's why with depression, helping to link individuals with treatment is so very important, because when you're in the middle of experiencing symptoms of depression, it can be really, really hard to be objective and to recognize that there is a way out, because it can just feel all-consuming. Another common symptom of depression is crying spells. So feeling like your emotions are just right under the surface. Sometimes individuals will say, I'm crying so easily, and I usually don't cry very often at all. Or I'm crying and I don't even know why. Having increased aches and pains is another common symptom. And then indecisiveness or distractibility. And that kind of comes with feeling overwhelmed, that those things are just more difficult. So in specific, sometimes these signs of depression show up a little bit differently as we are older. And so in particular, feeling hopeless or feeling helpless. So in thinking about what those words really mean, so hopelessness, I don't see any way that this is going to get better. Or helplessness, I don't feel like there's anything that I can do to have a positive impact on this situation. And so you can experience one of those, or you can experience both of those, but that is very common for depression in older adults. And if you think of kind of some contextual clues around that, I think it makes a lot of sense, because as we're getting older, we tend to go through large amounts of change, and we may go through a greater amount of loss or grief or transitions or changes in our routine or the people around us. Maybe we have more limited resources, or we're looking at the future and we're not sure what's going to happen next. So all of those things can play a role in feeling some hopelessness or helplessness. And so with the rest of those, there is some overlap in how that plays out with some of those previous symptoms of depression. But I just think it's good to hone in on how that looks specifically with older adults. So just one that I want to highlight is neglecting personal care. And so that might even kind of come with the words, why bother? What's the point? It just feels like too much. And so just kind of shutting down. So skipping meals, skipping medication, neglecting personal hygiene, like taking showers, getting dressed, changing clothes. Like if an individual spills something, it's just too much effort to change. And so again, not any one of those symptoms in isolation would automatically point to depression. But if you're noticing more than one sign and symptom together, and especially if that's a significant change for that individual, then it's worth assessing for depression. We just keep sneaking in more symptoms on there. Okay, so I love this image, and this is a PET scan. So it's from the Mayo Foundation, the Mayo Clinic, and basically what this is showing is on the left here, this brain that does not have as much highlighted area is an individual who's experiencing depression. Over here, it is a brain of an individual who is not depressed. And so we see how much that brain is lit up, which signifies all the different areas of the brain that are showing activity, versus over here, only seeing a minimal area that is lit up with activity. So pretty interesting that even the medical tests and findings reinforce what people are reporting symptomatically, which is less motivation, feeling lethargic, feeling overwhelmed, having difficulty following through with daily tasks. And so there are actually neurological implications for that show up in a PET scan. And one thing to me that I always like to highlight with that is it just shows that depression is not simply just a choice. I think sometimes we can either put pressure on ourselves or on someone else that we feel like we just ought to get over it, or we just ought to put a smile on and just make it all better. And depression is something that truly is a clinical diagnosis, and that person would love nothing else than to just feel better. But oftentimes it's not that simple. And so that's why truly effective treatment for depression or anxiety is oftentimes either therapy or psychotropic medication or a combination of the two. And alongside different coping strategies, individuals can do very well and be very responsive to treatment. But I think just recognizing this whenever we're taking that into consideration. All right, so our last area is dementia. And so with dementia, there are different types of diagnoses, and there are also different levels of severity. So an individual may have mild or moderate or severe dementia, and also it is progressive. So that is something that can change over time, that if an individual is first diagnosed with dementia, they may diagnose that at a certain stage, but then that will be progressive and will change over time. So with dementia, it damages the nerve cells in the brain, which impact memory, learning, language, and reasoning. And so short-term memory is impacted first, and then long-term memory. So if any of you have ever talked to an individual who struggles with dementia, you may notice that if you ask them something that was relatively recent, they may have difficulty remembering that, like, what did you have for lunch? Or did your friend come to visit? They may have difficulty recalling that and pulling that up, but then they may be able to recall something long-term, like a childhood home or a family member from the past. They may be able to even go into great detail in talking about those things because it's a different part of your brain, a different part of your memory. Also, another thing that is impacted by dementia is abstract reasoning. So you will tend to see individuals become a lot more literal with how they think about things. So they might have difficulty with something like this. So why shouldn't people in glass houses throw stones? Well, the glass will break. And so thinking of that very literally instead of being able to understand what that might be referring to as a play on words. Also, communication abilities will tend to decrease over time. So that interactive back and forth, expressive language of choosing words to communicate, and receptive language of being able to listen effectively and interpret what the other person is saying. Those skills will decrease over time with dementia. And they may have delusions or false ideas or beliefs. Another way that you maybe can think of this or relate to this is just having a hard time being oriented in reality. So maybe seeing someone and they remind them of someone else. And so they are thinking that that is who they are, even if they're no longer alive. And having a hard time being able to distinguish that or recognize that change. That would probably be an example of more severe dementia for something like that. But it might even be just with different things, like hearing something about our current president and thinking of it as a previous president, or just thinking that it's nighttime and not understanding why it wouldn't be okay to go out for a walk. And so just different things that might be disorienting are very common with dementia. So with dementia, symptoms do not fluctuate in intensity or duration within the same period of time. So why we included that statement is if you go back to the first of the three topics, which was delirium, we saw that there might be kind of this sudden onset, and then the individual might decline and then rally a little bit and decline. And so there can be kind of that quick fluctuation there, even though it's a sudden onset. And with dementia, the symptoms don't fluctuate within a period of time. So yes, over a longer period of time, it is progressive, that it can go from mild, moderate, severe, but that's over more of a prolonged period of time. So what else can cause dementia? What can contribute to that? So different medical conditions can contribute to dementia, and there's a whole list there to consider. And then also possible reversible conditions, which is interesting to think about. So brain injury, traumatic brain injury, even if it's not reversible in a sense of completely undoing damage caused by that, there are multiple medical advances and therapies and medication that can help to restore some of that level of functioning. And then going on down through the rest of that list, just looking at how sometimes when we have different levels that are out of balance or there's a deficiency, there can be different things that can be medically done for an intervention that can help to reverse or at least improve some of those conditions. All right, so just a quick overview here, and I think this chart is really helpful just to put them all side by side. So with delirium, we're looking at the onset being very fast, hours, even days of how long it lasts. With depression, more weeks to months. With dementia, months to years. So kind of on that spectrum of the quick onset all the way out to a gradual onset. With mood, with delirium, it fluctuates, can be agitated, can be more moody or acting out. With depression, mood tends to be low, more apathetic. With dementia, mood fluctuates, but usually there are some symptoms of depression that can go alongside that, or even just being more withdrawn from other people. The course, how that looks in playing out with delirium, it's more of an acute episode with more of a start and stopping point, and it generally responds to treatment. With depression and with dementia, it's both chronic. With depression, it does tend to respond to treatment. With dementia, there's deterioration over time. There are medications now that can slow the process of dementia or Alzheimer's, but unfortunately, there's not been a cure that's been developed at this time. So most of the medical interventions for dementia are aimed at managing symptoms or slowing the process. With thinking, for delirium, there are fluctuations in alertness, cognition, perceptions, and thinking. So remember with that, there can be some psychosis where an individual is seeing or hearing things that are not there, but usually that is short-lived and they're able to regain reality testing once their condition improves. With dementia, there's reduced memory, concentration, and low self-esteem. With depression, too, once an individual responds to treatment, there generally is improvement in those symptoms. With dementia, there's cognitive decline with problems in memory, and that again is going to show deterioration over time. Attention span with delirium tends to fluctuate. With depression, there's generally a loss of interest, difficulty with concentrating. With dementia, there's lower than normal attention span and difficulty concentrating as well. With sleep, with delirium, it's disturbed with no set pattern. It differs from night to night whenever those delirium symptoms are at play. With depression, it's disturbed. It can either be extra sleep or a shortage of sleep, and you can see that be unique to each individual. With dementia, they may be disturbed with a pattern that occurs at the same time most nights. So one version of that is called sundowners, where an individual becomes more restless or agitated around sundown time or evening. Delusions and hallucinations with delirium, that is a common symptom. Again, sudden onset. With depression, they may have hallucinations, but it's often very, very common to have symptoms of depression without hallucinations. And then with dementia, again, they may have delusions and hallucinations. So hearing things or seeing things that are not there. And then lastly, physical signs. So we really want to note again that delirium is caused by physical issues, medical issues. So that individual's vital signs will oftentimes fluctuate. With depression, we didn't type that in here, but it's not uncommon to experience chronic pain. So like headaches or muscle tension or just a general sense of not feeling well. And then with dementia, generally vital signs will not fluctuate, but it is important to watch the individual for any signs of discomfort because they may have difficulty verbally communicating that to you. So again, this is another slide that is very full of content. I think it's really good just to give a side-by-side comparison of these three different topics. So this is actually where we're going to wrap up tonight.